In September 1966, in the French countryside of Aveyron, a man is in pursuit of a luminous ball down a rural road. Just ahead of the national road, he spies the same projectile-shaped object that has haunted his family in the preceding days. He stops the car. He cuts the engine as he opens the door. Something happens. The shell is suddenly intensely luminous and starts to tilt. When it disappears, the luminous ball is still there ahead of him, as if waiting. The man returns to his dogged pursuit. Where will it lead him? Could it be headed toward the next landing place of the shell-like object? The chase continues at breakneck speed, and what it reveals is not a repeat observation, but something else. A disc-shaped object seen at close range, saucer-like in form, but also unlike anything encountered before. On its own, it is an astounding case from start to finish, but as we at Stories Lost were researching it, we came across an online post that gave us those familiar investigative chills. We found an observation from the same year that was so similar it felt eerie, except this one had unfolded on the other side of the Atlantic. In October, in Ipswich, Massachusetts, a couple wakes just before 5 in the morning. The house is still. The ocean lies dark beyond Crane's Beach. Through the window, they see something that does not belong there. An elongated, projectile-shaped object stands upright at the water's edge. It glows with a muted golden light that at times intensifies until the sand around its base becomes visible. Smaller points of light move above the beach. They do not drift aimlessly. They creep forward in uneven motion, at times slow, at times sudden, as if correcting their path. They approach the large body, gather near its upper section, then separate again. The movement appears deliberate. And then, a disc-shaped object appears, not like any of the smaller lights observed. Dark in mass yet faintly outlined by a weak glow, it moves low over the water, approaching to within a quarter mile of the house before passing behind a small island and vanishing from sight. The case had been documented in 1966 by Raymond E. Fowler of NICAP, but it resurfaced for us on a Facebook forum known as the UFO Files Group. A special thank you to Emile Gauthier for sharing it when we reached out. We were struck by how closely the details aligned and by the fact that both events occurred in the same year. The proportions, the movement of the smaller lights, the presence of a larger vertical structure, even the later observation of a disc-shaped object nearby. It was a remarkable convergence. Could they be related? As always here on Stories Lost, this is the opportunity to follow along and decide for yourself. In November 1969, the French UFO research journal Inforspace received a long letter describing a series of rather extraordinary events. One of its investigators, Dr. Dupin de la Guérivière, was asked to travel to the site and conduct an inquiry. The events took place somewhere in Aveyron, France, near one of the many farms scattered across the region. This particular farm was old, built in 1766. Its stone walls were thick and solid. The house included an upper floor where the bedrooms were located, offering a wide and unobstructed view of the surrounding countryside. South of the main house lay a courtyard, enclosed on 3 sides by outbuildings, including a barn and a stable. To the east, a main entrance opened directly onto the road. To the west, a secondary access led back to the road by way of a farm track. The holding itself was modest, covering about 18 hectares. Its activity was centered primarily on livestock, especially cows raised for the sale of calves. There was also mixed farming, with meadows, maize, wheat, oats, barley, and a small vineyard producing wine for family consumption. The interior was spacious, comprising 10 rooms in total. Most of the windows faced south, while others, narrower, opened toward the west and the north. Inside lived a family, 4 of whom would be directly affected: the grandmother, her daughter, her son-in-law, and their eldest son. The events witnessed by this farming family were numerous. One correspondent wrote to Infospace that they knew how to observe and were not inclined to fear. Yet the incidents followed one another in such number that their chronology became confused and difficult to reconstruct. That confusion affected not only the investigators, but the witnesses themselves, who struggled to reconstruct the sequence afterward, having neither recorded nor dated what they had experienced. But the earliest event is believed to have taken place on June 15th, 1966, at around 9:30 in the evening. It was the grandmother, 76 years old at the time, deeply attached to her grandchildren, who first raised the alarm. From the window of her upstairs bedroom, she was the first to notice that something unusual was taking place. She recounts her impressions with remarkable liveliness and ease of expression in the plain French of the countryside, where local dialect often surfaces in the emotion of a story she appears to relive as she tells it. I was at the window for a little while, because sometimes when you are old you go to breathe the air or whatever, but never had I seen lights like that, things like that. It was not lighting up anything. They were fires, fires, fires. Were you seeing several of them at that moment? At that moment, well, it was a bit big, about the size of 3 human heads. As she continued watching, the lights gradually came closer. They descended below the level of a hill around 800 meters from the house. At that moment, she remembers thinking to herself that something might be burning down there. The lights stood out clearly against the darkness, and she never lost sight of them. She did not perceive any distinct objects moving, only a steady glow. After that, they appeared to approach even closer, descending toward the small stream in the valley. When these positions were later checked against the map, this final stage corresponded to a distance of about 600 meters from the farm. Then I said to myself, well, now we won't see anything anymore. And all of a sudden it rose a little higher, she says, turning toward her son-in-law. And then we were wondering where it was going to go. Toward the other neighbor's side, maybe? I knew the people who lived over there, you see. And then, all of a sudden, it came closer. She stops for a moment, then continues. That is when I said, but what are these fires? There is no thunder, no storm, what is going on? So I called out, all these fires, I am too old. I do not want to see things like that. If it keeps moving like that, what will become of us in the end? Then it moves. It goes to the corner of the vineyard. There, you know well when I called you, she says again, turning toward her son-in-law. That is when I was seized with fear. The balls were 90 meters away. If it rises any higher, it will go into the barn. Everything will burn, the house and us with it. And I called him. I called him. In the darkness of a landscape she has known for 30 years, seeing it every day, she notices what she calls fires. They disappear, reappear. She follows their progression, always closer. They go down the small valley, climb back up the slope, drawing inexorably nearer to the farm, and soon they seem to threaten it. She is not conscious of an unknown phenomenon and tries to find an explanation. There is no storm, she says. She is not afraid of something supernatural, of something irrational. How could she even think of that? But it is the fear of fire which in the countryside frightens everyone. Disoriented, terrified, she calls her son-in-law for help, and later she will tell us that she went to bed fully dressed, fearing what might follow. There is here an account that rings with truth, the investigators conclude. No less remarkable is the path of these luminous balls, coming from such a distance, passing through obstacles, hedges, woods, fields, to head toward this farm for a purpose that cannot be explained. How can one deny them a will, a kind of instinct, an intelligence even? We will see later what they looked like. They are immaterial, simply luminous, neither craft nor plasma, a kind of will-o'-the-wisp, with behavior that is both irrational and purposeful. It is now the account of the son-in-law, the father of the family, the farmer, that will follow, and he too will relive for us this memorable evening. Yes, I went to the window. I saw nothing at first. I saw nothing. I waited 2 or 3 minutes, then I saw a ball. There, 15 meters from the house. I said, "Well, she was right, my mother-in-law. She was right. She was right." It was near the house, near the wall. Yes, 15 meters. What was it doing there? Well, I do not know. At that moment it was motionless. It stayed there 2 or 3 minutes roughly, then nothing anymore. Like that. Snap. Like turning a knob, I see nothing anymore. They reappeared farther away? Yes. At 1 kilometer, 500 meters, it depended. You could see it. Then snap. Snap. And between the extinction and the new point, did a long time pass? Oh no, a few seconds. 2 or 3 seconds, no more. It had a round shape, you said? Yes, round. Yes. More domed on top than on the bottom. The bottom was flatter. You went outside at that moment? Yes, I went out. I went to look. Later, he would lead investigators to the spot where he was standing in his vineyard at the time of his observation, a place located 50 meters west of the farm. What happened then? I looked over there for a while. I stood there quite some time. They were turning. There were 6 of them at that moment. You say there were 6 balls? Yes. At 1 kilometer, about 1.2 kilometers. They were turning in a field. Well, in a square plot of land. I do not know how to explain it. Asked to be more precise, he indicates the location using familiar landmarks on the hillside, a lone tree in the distance and a stretch of pasture visible from where they stand. They were turning at a distance. How can I say it from here? I could not really make it out. Maybe 50 meters apart. Maybe even less. I do not know. And I could see them moving. His son had specified 10 meters apart in a letter. He intervenes during the questioning, but his father does not follow him on this detail. In fact, they seem to him farther apart than 10 meters and closer than 50 meters. The father continues. All of a sudden, they were moving at walking pace like a tractor, you know. When I say a tractor, I mean in first gear. He explains that the 6 lights then began to move together. They advanced one behind the other, aligned in a single line, maintaining their spacing as they went around the field. They did not flicker or disappear as they moved. Throughout this motion, all 6 remained fully luminous, their light steady and uninterrupted. I say it is a tractor, but I say there was no noise. I would have heard it, because at night you hear an engine from far away. But I heard nothing. It is not a tractor. It is strange. There would not be so many anyway, so many lights. So they turned there for, I do not know, half an hour, so many lights. I could not understand what it was. Then, at a certain moment, it latched on and disappeared, he says. His son prompts him with the word they would later use, the obus. You had not yet seen the shell-shaped object at that point? The father of the house confirms that he had already seen the larger object. Asked later when this first occurred, he explains that it was just as he went outside. At that time, it was visible in the same location. As for its general appearance, he says that it was luminous. At first, he thought it might be a tree on fire, but he saw no flames and no smoke. Nothing was burning. Pressed further, he cannot give a more specific color, only that it was luminous. When asked whether it matched the color of the balls, he answers that it did, the same color, exactly the same. He then adds that the luminous balls eventually moved toward it and joined it, disappearing into what he simply refers to as that thing there. Everything seemed to have returned to order, more or less, the balls having been absorbed by the bullet-shaped object. Intrigued but growing tired of watching, reassured that there was no risk of fire, and still astonished by what he had just seen, the witness went back into the farmhouse and went to bed. Like the old woman, the witness seems to relive the events as he recounts them. At this point, the son had not yet seen anything himself. He did not place much weight on what had been reported from the evening of June 15th, and his first reaction was to assume his father had imagined it. Let's not forget that it is June in the south of France. The countryside is green, vegetation swollen with sap, fields and meadows make up 9/10 of the landscape, and a fire is improbable. Our witness, even if he does not state it explicitly, does not accept fire as an explanation. He is completely astonished to see these luminous balls. Faced with something he cannot explain, he keeps returning to the same thought, repeated 3 times. She was right. His mother-in-law's warning, previously set aside, now adds to his confusion. The ball moves away, and more intrigued than frightened, he sees in the distance what he still takes to be a burning tree. The subjective and reasonable image he forms does not correspond to what he sees. There is neither flame nor smoke. It is therefore not a tree that is burning. He will call it the thing. It does not occur to him that it could be a craft. How could he think of it as such? It is then that he sees the procession of the 6 luminous balls, their alignment, the regularity of their movement. It all makes him think of tractors, forgetting for a moment the balls he had seen from his window. He realizes that here too his comparison fails, and then they hook on to the thing. Everything is disconcerting. Everything is irrational. These balls that come close to the farm, that go out, snap, that light up again, the thing, the circling of the balls, all of this in the calm of the night, without noise, unreal, like in a dream. After the account of the evening of June 15, 1966, the inquiry remained caught in a general discussion of the events that followed, a monstrous tangle in which their chronology became confused. Mr. Chassaigne, who was following the case on site, later wrote on May 22, 1970 to address this difficulty. I am sure that there is a crowd of facts of which we were not aware, and which appear like flashes in the conversation. Thus, the father had already seen a ball well before June 15th, and the old woman saw some after. The investigators then turned to the mother of the family, who until now has said nothing, and ask whether she herself saw anything. She answers that she did see the lights, but no longer remembers clearly, adding that she is nearsighted. The father remarks that she is not particularly interested in such matters. The farmer's wife then recalls a specific moment. She says there was one evening when her husband spoke of a fire in the fodder store. The father resumes, saying that the lights came more than 15 times, but that only one ever approached the house, and that it did so twice. Did that one separate itself from the others? Yes. So one ball separated from the others. 2 seconds, then it went back. They came 15 times perhaps, but not next to the house. They came twice next to the house. It moved away, then it came back. It disappeared, then it came back? How did it do that? Did it light up or by going out? That is to say, it was off, we could not see it anymore. Did it move backward? It moved. We saw it coming closer. Then I do not know if it went around. It is about going around the building. We did not see it anymore. It moved backward. Well, it went off backward. I did not see that myself. We did not see it. It was moving at walking pace, roughly. It was moving alongside the house. And about 15 times this happened? Yes. Twice it came next to the house. Twice. It blocked your way at a given moment? Yes, it blocked my whole way there, right next to me. The old woman says, I went to bed. I told myself that if I screamed, the neighbors would come out, and I went to bed. She adds, he stayed there watching, but I went to bed. I did not undress, and I stayed there. They address the father. Did you see them again after that, before January 1967? Oh yes, I saw a ball in the sky. A ball? In the sky? Yes. The old woman intervenes. That glow you said you had seen? The one that lit up the whole field? The son immediately objects. But that was not that day. The father agrees. Yes, that was not that day. The son adds that it was not very long ago, perhaps 5 or 6 months earlier. The father confirms this. So in 1969, last year? Yes, last year. But we are not there yet. We are on Friday, January 6th, 1967. The night when you, the father of the house, called your son who was asleep. What happened that day? I went outside to the stable to check the livestock. Then I saw that light there, 50 meters away. Not even that, 3 meters from the house. I said to myself, what is that? What is that? Quickly I went to get a flashlight, and I said to myself, you will go around the back to see what it is, yes? When I went around the back, it followed me. It followed me all along the road. It followed me for about 60 meters, roughly. And then there was a passage where I wanted to go through, to go around the back. So it followed me all along, all along, all along. I stopped where I wanted to go around the back, and the thing stopped there, on the passage. I say, now it is no use insisting I cannot pass. They ask whether the object appeared large at that moment. The father answers that it did, estimating its diameter at about 1.5 meters. Asked whether it was the same white color, he confirms that it was. He is then asked whether it illuminated the ground. He insists that it did not. It was luminous, he says, but it lit up nothing around it, nor did he feel any heat coming from it. At this point, the son intervenes, noting that the object he himself observed was smaller, no more than 1.2 meters across. The father resumes his account, explaining that he then returned toward the house, and that the ball moved back in the same direction, just as it had the first time. They turn to the son and ask whether this was when his father called him and he got up. The son replies that when his father came back and called him, he saw nothing at first. The father adds that the object had disappeared again. He says he remained outside for a while longer, and that it then returned. With a touch of teasing, an investigator asks the son whether he was the one who made it go away. There is some laughter. The son repeats that when he looked, he saw nothing at that moment. The father repeats that the object left again, that it did not stay. He says that he remained there, watching, and that he told his son that it had come back. The son says, but I saw it a few minutes later. I saw one that, well, on the other side over there from the window. It had gone onto a little path there that goes uphill, and I said to myself, well, this time there is something. They ask whether he then went back downstairs. He confirms that he did. He explains that he had already gone down once before, then gone back up after seeing nothing, and that this was the moment when he came down again. It was then, he says, that both of them saw what he calls the obus, or shell. The investigators confirm that they mean both father and son. He answers without hesitation that yes, they both saw it. The old woman says, they came to call me, of course, but... So? Oh no, I did not go then. My daughter was crying. I told her, innocent one, and then I went down anyway, and then I saw that fire. The fire. She slips into dialect, untranslatable in the emotion she is reliving. One can see how shaken she is by the memory of what she saw. It is true all the same, she says. You are not used to seeing fires like that, all the same. Then the investigators address the father and the son. What did the two of you see? What was there at that moment? The son says, I saw the 6 balls. What happened? The father explains that this was too much. He says, yes, but that was enough for me. I did not stay. I went back in and went to bed. Asked whether he really stopped watching after seeing the shell, he insists, no, I did not continue the session. When the investigators ask what the experience made him feel, whether he was afraid, he hesitates, searching for words. His son intervenes, recalling that he wanted to throw a stone at it when it was close, at the ball, but he did not dare. The father confirms this hesitation, saying, no. Oh. I really felt like doing something, but... Pressed again, he finally admits what stopped him. Yes, no doubt. When I saw that it was following me. Asked whether he had a flashlight, he replies that he did, in his pocket, but adds that he never used it. I wanted to go around the back to see what it was, and I could not get through. I gave up. The investigators then turned to the son and resumed questioning him about what he had seen through the window. 3 branches on each side, and at a given moment 1 ball on each branch. 3 balls on each side. That made 6 balls. Asked to clarify, he adds that they were straight, exactly like those in the drawing. There was a headlight at the top, right at the very end, and it lit up the window up there. It lit up the whole bedroom. I had the window open there, facing it. They ask whether the beam was diffuse or very narrow. The son answers without hesitation, "Oh, narrow, very narrow." Asked whether it illuminated his bedroom, he replies, "Oh yes, I think so indeed. I could see as if it were broad daylight." They clarify that by then he had gone back upstairs to his room. He confirms this, saying that he had returned to his bedroom afterward. Asked whether the shell was still there, he explains that he did not see it leave that night. He adds that the light continued to sweep through the room, though not steadily. Yes, it was lighting up the bedroom. Intermittently though. It was turning. When asked whether it turned like a lighthouse, he agrees, explaining that at times it even lit up the neighboring bedroom. By then, he says, it was already late, around 11 o'clock or perhaps 11:15. One of the investigators remarks, "Not very funny then." The father interjects, "No, you wonder what it is." The son then continues, "All of a sudden, everything burst. I did not see anything anymore. I do not know if it had gone or if it was still there." Looking back at this moment, this is when the farmer's son is confronted with the phenomenon for the first time. Until then, he had not witnessed anything directly, and had given little weight to his father's earlier accounts of strange lights around the farm. When he was first called that night, he saw nothing and assumed his father might have been mistaken. But at the window, when the narrow beam swept through his room, and he saw the 6 luminous spheres arranged on their branches, something shifted. From that point on, he could no longer remain a detached listener. He became a witness in his own right. In the days that followed, this shift would lead him to pursue the phenomenon by car, with consequences none of them could have anticipated. The father is here at the center of the evening. If until this point he had merely been intrigued, perhaps because he had remained relatively distant from the manifestations, this time he is afraid, even if a certain reserve keeps him from admitting it openly. This ball that he wants to surprise in order to see what hides behind it, and which twice thwarts his calculations by blocking his path, unsettles him. The investigators took care not to intervene, allowing his reactions to surface naturally. In the investigator's view, these reactions reflect an inner process of thought, which even if never stated outright, is nonetheless real in the way the events unfold. From the moment the ball appears, they sense that he no longer treats it as a purely physical phenomenon, such as fire, but begins to think of it as something living. He even seems to assign it a face, or at least a front, and imagines that by approaching it from behind, he might avoid being seen and learn something more. This reading, they argue, follows directly from his own words. They also note how his intentions are thwarted twice, and how, in between, he finds himself walking a path he had not planned to take, accompanied by something wholly unexpected. Those 60 meters must have felt interminable to him. It followed me all the way. The investigators remark that one has the impression of an endless stretch of road, even though the walk itself could not have lasted more than a minute. He did think while walking of throwing something at it, a branch, a stone, or of using his flashlight, but he did not dare. In reality, he was afraid of an unknown reaction from the thing, because already he attributes to it a life of its own, a will. He nevertheless wants to put an end to it, and thinks of the small dirt path where he might perhaps have the opportunity to surprise it. He gets there, but there it is, occupying the entrance, forbidding him access. He gives up, and the victorious ball escorts him back to the house. This notion of fear or anxiety in the face of these disconcerting phenomena is also found in the 2 women. From the first appearances, there reigns in this farm a feeling of insecurity, like a hovering threat. And at the father's call the cup overflows, the mother begins to cry. The old woman, who wants to appear strong and tries to lift her daughter's spirits by addressing her sharply, is not reassured. It is the son who later, analyzing the situation, will say to Mr. Chassaigne, "I have the clear impression that we could have seen many other things if we had gone about it differently, but they had understood that we were scared." At this point, the investigators make their position explicit. As they put it, "We cannot pass over in silence the behavior of this ball, for it is probably the first time that such an analysis has been possible, and one feels dizzy at what it might suggest. The reason for its presence remains for the moment unexplained. We may perhaps learn it over the course of this long and delicate investigation which continues, for we have the feeling of having arrived at a turning point in the knowledge of UFOs. The near future will tell us." But what did the balls do? The father is alone. He sees this ball. He does not speak. There is no one. He decides inwardly to go and fetch an electric flashlight, to go around the house by the road in order to surprise this ball from behind. He carries this out, but when he reaches the road, the ball is there, seeming to wait for him, forcing him to change his plan. It seems to have divined his intentions and anticipated them. Oh, one can invoke chance, but the fact will be repeated a second time, under the same conditions, when it will forbid him access to the dirt path. As bold as this thought may be, we are led to suggest that the ball showed prior knowledge of the witness's intentions. No words were exchanged, with what or with whom, moreover. It would therefore be a psychic reading of thought, without the witness being aware of it. A fantastic hypothesis, but everything here is irrational, including this presence which does indeed seem to be a reality. The ball, moreover, appears to have a motivated behavior, the analysis of which is more difficult. It would be rash to maintain that it wanted to direct the father's action, but we are nevertheless obliged to note that twice it opposed the execution of a preconceived plan. The result was that the father returned to his farm and called his son. It is not forbidden to think that this may have been the possible motivation. In the investigator's view, once he is drawn into events, the son becomes the central witness to these manifestations. It is before him that the UFO phenomenon will go on to unfold across a varied range of observations, leaving after effects that the investigators note recur in other cases, in other places, and at other times. In a separate sequence, not clearly situated in the chronology, another episode emerges, involving the dogs. At the time, there were 2 female dogs on the farm. They slept outside in the yard near the stable door, about 15 meters from the house. Before going to bed, the father, from the first-floor window, observes the sky and notices the obus and the activity of the balls, which he will call the commotion. I see that one of the balls begins to move closer. The dogs were next to the door there, 2 meters away, on the other side of the yard, 2 or 3 meters. So I saw that commotion up there, and I said to myself, what is going to happen? Is it going to come into the yard or maybe into the house? So I said, go on, get it, or in dialect, aki piklu. Then they set off in pursuit and followed it as far as the gate. As far as the corner of the vineyard? Yes, as far as the corner of the vineyard. But they never got too close anyway? Oh no. 1 meter 50, 1 meter to 1 meter 50. They were not lit up by the light? No. I saw the dogs up to the edge, and then it disappeared all at once, and the dogs stopped barking. The investigators note that it is impossible to place oneself in the position of the dogs. They observe only that at their master's voice, the animals ran toward the lights just as they would have run toward cattle. The dogs showed no sign of fear, likely because they perceived nothing that struck them as abnormal, nothing that would have made them hesitate to obey. The investigators consider this detail worth emphasizing, noting the absence of fear or hesitation in the animal's behavior. The evening of Friday, January 6, 1967, already described, marks the beginning of a series of observations that will place the sun at the center of what follows on Wednesday, January 11th. It was possible to establish that on Saturday the 7th, Monday the 9th, and Tuesday the 10th of January, the shell and the luminous balls were seen again, this time farther to the west, without any notable incidents. The episode involving the 2 female dogs may have taken place on Sunday the 8th, though this remains uncertain. When the investigators turn to the Sun to discuss the events of that Wednesday evening, a new element emerges. He explains that the shell either changed position that night or that there may have been more than one object involved. The Sun says, "On Wednesday I saw the shell from the house. I do not know if it was the same one, because before taking the car, I saw that it was over there, to the west, and when I took the car it was here to the north. I do not know if it was the same one." So explain this to us in detail. On Wednesday you saw the object at approximately the same location where you had seen the others? Yes. In any case, I was going out every evening and at that time I was seeing them all the time. That is right. Yes, you were seeing it more or less always in the same place? Yes. Except on Wednesday? Yes. On Wednesday too I saw it. So I went out and there was a ball that was going up along the small path over there, and it stopped on the road, in the middle of the road. Then I went back into the house, I went up to the bedroom up there, and I saw the ball. It was still in the middle of the road. Then I had the idea of taking the car in order to... Before moving on to the account of the incidents of that evening, let's note that over the course of different conversations, the Sun pointed out an important contextual detail. In this countryside, at night, at that time of year, people go to bed early, and one could see here and there lights piercing the darkness which, one after another, went out. According to the witness, the balls only began to appear when the nearby lights had disappeared. The investigators got into Mr. Chassaine's car to retrace the route the Sun had taken, a stretch of road measuring roughly 3 kilometers. As they drove, the Sun explained what had happened. After he had set off in his car, he had seen a luminous ball emerge from a small side path and position itself in the middle of the road. As he had continued forward, the ball had begun to move as well, maintaining the same speed. It had not been following him, he said, but had remained ahead of the car. Further along the road, near a roadside post, he had noticed the shell-shaped object. He had stopped the car at that precise point, had cut the engine, and had observed it. The object had been positioned to his left and had appeared very large. He clarified that it had not been near the pond itself, but slightly beyond, at a distance of roughly 10 meters from the post, and somewhat lower down. In his estimation, it had been larger than the nearby tree. At the same time, the luminous ball he had been following had stopped farther up the road, near the end of the stretch. He then pointed out the trees bordering the pond and explained that he had noticed another luminous ball there, white and identical to the one he had been following. It had been positioned above the pond. After a few moments, he said, that ball had moved toward the shell and had given him the impression that it entered it. The object stood opposite the witness, between the pond and the road. When asked whether it was as tall as the nearby tree, he immediately corrected the suggestion. In his view, it was much higher. He added that he had the impression it was not touching the ground at all. And then, at the precise moment when he opened the car door, the object suddenly became very luminous. At the same time, it began to emit a whistling sound and lifted away. In one of his letters, Mr. Chassain draws attention to a specific feature of this phase of the event, and underlines why the account is of particular interest. There is no possibility here of reference or borrowing from earlier testimonies. At the time, he notes, everyone knew the standard model. A rocket rises vertically, then at a certain altitude tilts in order to align itself with its trajectory. Its axis coincides with its path. The witness does not rely on these familiar images. He appears instead to be describing what he actually perceived. According to him, the object tilted and then departed. When it did so, the luminous ball was still there in front of him, as if waiting. Asked to estimate the distance, he hesitates, then points out a roadside marker further up the road. It was roughly there, he says, more or less in front of the marker, or close to it. He says that he set off again. At that point, he no longer remembers clearly whether the engine had been stopped or not, but in any case, he drove on. After about 10 meters, the ball ahead of him began to move again as well. Mr. Chassagne starts his own car, checks the odometer, and they drive up to the roadside marker. He announces a distance of 150 meters. The witness continues. He was driving on this stretch at about 70 kilometers per hour. It was night. The ball, which he estimates at about 1.2 meters in diameter at most, had not changed color. At that, they continue driving. Asked where he reached 100 kilometers per hour, he points to a place further up the road. He says that there the speedometer read between 100 and 105, and that even then the ball kept exactly the same distance ahead of him. The investigators note that he cannot have driven at that speed for long. He agrees, only a few seconds. When he slowed down, the ball slowed down as well. It always remained in front of him, always at the same distance, about 150 meters. They now reach the national road. As he arrived there, the engine suddenly stopped, and at the same time he saw the saucer approaching from further ahead. Everything went out at once. The engine stopped, the headlights went out, everything. He tried the starter, but nothing happened. In an earlier account, he would add that he also tried to switch on the interior dome light, but it did not come on. The ball was still in front of him. It had stopped in the middle of the national road, roughly in the center. According to a previous account, the ball then jumped the ditch and came to a stop in the field to the right of his car, at a distance of about 4 meters. It was at that moment that he was seized by panic, because now he saw the saucer coming down. It was descending, steadily, lower and lower. He saw it come down and then drop into a low position. The investigators think it was coming from the northwest and heading toward the southeast. In an earlier written account, the witness says that he had opened the left window and saw an object whose shape was unfamiliar to him, which he described as a flat oval. It passed to his right and went off toward the southeast. While the core of the account is similar, details vary from one telling to another. We will return to this. At the time, he had cold sweats running down his back and was soaked with perspiration. The saucer was to his right, at a distance of about 20 meters, over the meadow. It was hovering 3 to 4 meters above the ground. It was about the size of a Peugeot 404, perhaps a little larger. There was a light at the rear. The light was oriented in the direction of travel. When he first saw the object approach, the light was therefore on the opposite side. Its color was red. On the upper surface, facing him, there were 2 domes. They were not aligned one behind the other. One was forward and to the right. The other was slightly behind and to the left. The arrangement was diagonal, yes. The elements were positioned diagonally in relation to the oval body of the craft. Relative to the 2 domes, the rear light was situated between them. As for the domes themselves, they rose slightly and then dipped again, forming a gentle curve rather than a peak. Asked about the interior, he says that it appeared to be lit in green inside, within both domes. He is less certain about what he saw next. It was very dark, and he had the impression of a kind of haze or mist. Whether inside or outside he cannot say, either within or around the 2 domes. Within that haze, he had the impression of seeing 2 figures. Human figures, he says. Like astronauts. They seemed to be wearing flight-type suits, light in color, standing out as white against green. There were 2 silhouettes. He insists on that point, though they were very blurred. They did not appear to move. He believes there was a head shape as well, likely a helmet. He also heard a sound. There was a whistling noise at the moment it left. It was the same kind of sound he had heard earlier from the shell, but less sharp, less high-pitched. Just before it finally left, he saw it rise again, maybe to about 50 meters, then drop suddenly, as if falling. It stopped abruptly at 2 or 3 meters above the ground. From there, it shot off toward the east at tremendous speed. At that moment, its appearance changed. It became intensely luminous all around, like fire. The color was white tending toward yellow. The light surrounded the entire object, enclosing it completely in a glowing halo. Inside the car, everything came back to life. The headlights turned on by themselves. The starter worked again. The engine ran normally. When he tried it, the car functioned as if nothing had happened. He was badly shaken. Later, when asked about his watch, he said it had kept running normally. At several points, He is overtaken by his own memories. He pauses, searches for details, tries not to forget anything, then moves on, only to return later to another moment of fear, as if afraid it might otherwise be lost. After describing the way the object moved, he circles back and adds something else. He says there was also a wave of heat, as if it had suddenly become hot, even though it was January, at night. It was not a mild sensation. He describes it as a very intense wave of heat. It did not feel like warm air around him. What he felt was on his skin, especially the skin of his face. He had the impression that his face was burning. As soon as it left, the wave of heat disappeared. Everything returned to normal. He felt relieved. At that moment, the headlights came back on. He turned the key and the engine started immediately. The car ran normally again. He did not try to follow anything else. He went straight home. They set off again. Along the way, they try to clarify the question of the shell-shaped object appearing in 2 different locations. They then arrive at the spot associated with the shell in this part of the account. They ask whether, from his window, he would have been able to see 2 shell-shaped objects if there had been 2. He says that perhaps he would have, but that he only ever saw the one. They ask whether, when he left in the car to pursue the ball, the shell had already been positioned at this spot, or whether it had been somewhere else. He hesitates. Asked again whether he had seen the object before setting off after the ball, he answers yes, and yes, it had been positioned there. That means it was not in the same place as on the previous days. No, it was not, he answered. They ask whether, on the Wednesday, he had seen it at the beginning in the same usual location. He says no. That day as well, he saw it arrive. He insists on that point. He saw it arrive. It was already tilted as it came in, tilted relative to the vertical. He says it arrived slowly. Asked how it came into land, he explains that it approached from the north, perhaps from the northwest, and that its path was not straight. It zigzagged slightly, shifting to the right and then to the left. Not sharply, he says, but with small deviations, like a fly making short, uneven movements. The investigators cannot determine whether the shell moved along the roadside without the witness noticing, or whether there were 2 objects present that evening. What is clear, however, is that the memory of the arrival returned to him during the interview. He was able to describe the slow, hesitant trajectory before it came to rest. They then turned to what happened after these observations. The witness had previously mentioned a sudden episode of overwhelming sleepiness. Not immediately, he clarifies, but a few days later. About a week after the observation, perhaps the following Tuesday. He cannot recall the exact day. He explains that it did not come on all at once. By mid-March it had returned, but this time much more intensely. He says that during that period he could have slept, perhaps 20 hours out of 24. In any case, he was sleeping at least 18 hours a day. He did not consult a doctor. His parents urged him to, but he refused. They were worried, he says. By the end, they were genuinely concerned. But when it came on, he just felt he had to sleep. There was no resisting it. When it took hold, he could no longer remain standing. When he was awake, however, he felt normal. The only difference was the amount he slept. Never had anything of the sort happened to him before. By his estimate, this lasted from around mid-January to mid-March. Roughly 2 full months. He repeats that all he knows is that he had to sleep. He did try once to resist it. On a Sunday, he pushed himself to stay up until 7 or 8 in the evening. He says he would have fallen asleep at the wheel if he had tried to go on, even with coffee. It is noted that the farm is far from large towns, and that on Sundays he normally stayed out very late at night. Returning home around 8 in the evening was completely out of character for him. Then he adds something else, hesitantly. He says he does not know how to explain it. At times, he says, the sleepiness morphed into a strange out-of-body experience, and he could not move. Not an arm, not a finger, not a leg, nothing. This would last a few seconds when it happened. This occurred mostly in the early morning, around 4 or 5 o'clock. Awake in bed, he would begin to drift. He would try to speak. Then after a few moments, he could no longer move. His body would not respond, but his mind remained clear. his awareness remained intact. This happened 2 or 3 times. He says it felt as though his mind was outside his body. He tried to command his body, but he could not. He was like someone dead, he says, yet he was fully conscious. His limbs no longer obeyed him. The second time it happened, he was petrified. He remembers thinking, "This time you are paralyzed." He tried to call out. He could not. He was blind, mute, and limp. All that remained was awareness. Asked whether this sensation involved his body, he hesitates. He says that it felt as though he were floating above his body. He is asked whether he had the impression of seeing himself lying there. He answers no. Asked whether it was a kind of doubling, he does not affirm it. He repeats that he lived through it, but that explaining it is extremely difficult. He does not know how to put it into words. The events reported up to this point reflect the unfolding of the third sequence of the investigation. The witness has given this account 3 times, first in a letter, then to Monsieur Dupin de la Guérivière, and finally to the investigators themselves. While the essential facts and the core of the account are identical in all 3 versions, there are, as one would expect, differences in detail. Considering that the events dated back 3 years, that the witness had taken no notes, that he had been confronted with numerous manifestations, and that under the same conditions anyone would also have forgotten certain details, the investigators do not attempt to catalog these discrepancies. They concern mainly chronology, orientation on one occasion, and omissions. Throughout the investigation, the investigators had the constant impression that the witness was reliving his observations and that events were resurfacing in his memory. Often, caught up in his recollections, he did not hear their questions. They never had the feeling that he was adding anything. On the contrary, they felt that he was forgetting rather than embellishing. At this stage, the inquiry no longer speaks with a single voice. The material gathered is then examined individually by 2 separate investigators, each approaching it from their own perspective, with their own criteria and points of attention, written and signed as such. The first commentary comes from Dr. Dupin de la Guérivière. He thinks the report itself appears very complete, but it relies on a single primary witness, the sun, and this inevitably weakens the weight of the testimony. He draws attention to the sun's description of the craft as having 2 domes, which he considers highly atypical. Referring to published material from the 1968 UFO Symposium, where 63 different object shapes are catalogued, he observes that this configuration does not clearly correspond to any of the established patterns. He asks that, if these comments are published, it be made explicit that certain interpretations belong to Mr. Chassaigny alone. He adds that some conclusions may be expressed too harshly, and that extended reflection on these matters can lead to very different interpretations. Contrary to Dr. Dupin, Mr. Chassaigny finds that the sun's involvement is central and that the final episode is the richest in events that could veritably push the boundaries for how we can understand these types of phenomena. It is here that the role of the sun becomes central, as he emerges as the principal witness. Chassaigny notes that many details have been left aside, simply because they cannot be placed with certainty in the chronology of this exceptionally long observation period. It is even possible, he suggests, that the landing of the shell-shaped object occurred on Friday, January 13th, since the events continued through Saturday the 14th, making a total of 9 active evenings, with a clear peak on Wednesday the 11th. On that Wednesday evening, around 9 o'clock, the sun suddenly decides to go and approach the luminous balls more closely, using his car. Chassaigny explains that he tried to understand how this decision came about. It was not something the sun had been considering beforehand. The idea imposed itself on him almost instinctively. It arose suddenly, as an urge or impulse rather than a plan. Chassaigny stresses this point to show that the sun did not reflect at all before leaving. He adds that, logically, had the sun stopped to think even briefly, he might well have refrained. Given the speed these objects had already demonstrated, it would have been easy for one of the balls to break off the pursuit at any moment, simply by leaving the road. At this stage, Chassagne says, there are only two possible positions. Either the testimony is rejected outright, in which case the entire account must be read differently, or it is accepted. If it is accepted, one is then forced to consider an intelligent behavior on the part of the pursued ball. How else, he asks, can one understand the extraordinary behavior of this ball, which maintains a constant distance from its pursuer and remains on the road throughout the chase? He adds that during the entire pursuit, the ball stayed 20 to 30 centimeters above the ground, over very uneven terrain. From there, Chassagne says, it is only a short step to imagine that the ball was in some way drawing its pursuer along. This is a step he refuses to take himself. He leaves it to each person to draw their own conclusions or to seek a rational explanation. During this nighttime pursuit, there comes a moment when the ball is caught directly in the car's headlights. The sun states that its color did not change, and that he observed no metallic reflection. This brings the account to the first stop of that unusual night. The sun comes to a halt near the shell-shaped object. The craft is motionless and vertical, its base about 2 meters above the ground, standing in a field visible from the farm at a distance of roughly 550 meters. In that light, he adds an important detail from the son's account. Before leaving by car, the son says he saw the shell-shaped object from the house. Later, out on the road, he also reports a luminous ball positioned on a pond, visible from the roadway and lying lower than the shell, at roughly 100 meters from it. He says he watched that ball depart, move toward the shell, and then disappear into it, as if absorbed. He also says he witnessed the departure of the shell itself. Chassagne then proposes a parallel between the behavior of this shell-shaped object and that of the so-called cigar-shaped objects reported for many years, in particular those described by Aimé Michel in his classic volume À propos des soucoupes volantes. Several similarities in behavior. In both cases, an increase in brightness appears to be linked to departure. A vertical position is associated with immobility. An inclined attitude corresponds to movement, and the shell seems to play the same role with the luminous balls as the cigars do with the discs. He immediately stresses, however, that the comparison has limits. To his knowledge, cigar-shaped objects have never been observed so close to the ground. Their dimensions and overall forms are also different. The resemblance, he says, concerns behavior rather than shape or context, which makes direct comparison with earlier testimonies difficult. Having said this, he returns to the events of the night of January 11th and to the pursuit itself. After the shell disappeared, one luminous ball remained, still waiting in the middle of the road, about 150 meters ahead of the car. The son decided to continue the pursuit. Once again, the same pattern repeated itself. The ball maintained a constant distance, regardless of the speed of the vehicle. As the son approached the intersection with the national road, the engine stalled, the headlights went out, and he stopped on the roadside. At that moment, a disc-shaped object appeared. The son experienced an intense sensation of heat and a form of paralysis. The object then disappeared, and everything returned to normal. Chassagne reflects on this episode. He notes that sensations of heat and paralysis have been reported on several occasions in other cases and widely circulated in the literature. Their presence here is therefore not, in itself, a reason for rejection. Nor, he argues, is there any reason to accept the earlier events while dismissing this one. He also returns to the son's later episode of overwhelming sleep. He suggests that it is reasonable to suppose this need for sleep was a consequence of exposure to one or more of the objects. More specifically, he adds that it might be consistent to relate it to the same kind of radiation invoked to account for the heat and paralysis. Chassagne concludes cautiously. He says only that the case remains open to further developments. It is extraordinary enough to make some dream, remarkable enough to make many reflect, and irrational enough to make others scoff. It is the latter response, he adds, that he finds the least compelling. But as we know, the quiet farmland around Aveyron may not have been the only place where related phenomena were witnessed. In October of 1966, the same year that it begun in Aveyron, on the other side of the Atlantic, A strange sight emerges as the morning light rises over the horizon. On Saturday morning, September 17th, 1966, at approximately 4:45 a.m., Mrs. M awoke during a coughing spell. She rose to get a drink of water and noticed a light in the area of Cranes Beach, opposite their home, about half a mile away to the southeast. She called her husband, who joined her. For the next hour and a half, they observed the activity, first from inside the house and later through the open windows of their porch. The first object they sighted was elongated, cigar-shaped, and standing upright on the beach near the water's edge. It emitted a golden white light that fluctuated, at times dim, at times bright enough to illuminate the sand around its base. At intervals, it appeared to tilt to approximately 60 degrees from the vertical. They never observed it depart. Instead, as daylight increased, it seemed simply to fade from view. One notable feature was what they described as a dotted line effect, extending from the middle of the object down to the ground at roughly a 45-degree angle. The impression was similar to that of a ladder leaning against the structure. From their vantage point, the height of the object measured about 6 inches visually, which at that distance would correspond to an estimated height of approximately 500 feet. The object remained in place for over 1 hour. If the comparison holds, the estimated height of the Ipswich object would be roughly 10 times greater than that of the projectile-shaped object reported in France. During the observation period, 2 bright lights appeared above the beach and moved toward the vertical object. The witnesses described them as about the size of peas at arm's length. Their motion was irregular, almost skipping, at times rapid, at times slower. As the 2 lights reached the upper portion of the vertical structure, they seemed to merge. At that moment, the witnesses had the impression of 3 lights instead of 2. The smaller lights then departed again from the larger object on several occasions, moving low over the water and at times disappearing behind the hills near Cranes Beach. In addition, a separate object was observed. It was elliptical in shape and dark in appearance, except for a faint glow outlining its form. This object moved low over the water toward the house, approaching to within approximately 1/4 of a mile before passing behind a small island in front of the property. Mr. and Mrs. M did not see it leave the area. They did not visit the island the following day, nor did they go to Cranes Beach to look for traces. Instead, Mrs. M contacted the Coast Guard to ask whether helicopters had been flying in the area that morning, possibly searching for a missing cruiser reported earlier that week. She was informed that no aircraft had been operating at that time. The night was clear and without wind. The moon was not showing, but the stars were visible overhead. The tide was at about half level, and the water appeared calm. Both witnesses stated that they heard no sound coming from the observed objects. The only sound they recalled distinctly was that of surf breaking along the shore. According to the investigator, Mr. and Mrs. M were cooperative throughout the interview and indicated they would be willing to discuss further details in the future if required. What do we make of this? What begins as a single night at a rural farm extends into a tangled sequence of events that implicates an entire family. In that same year, a comparable report emerges across the Atlantic. It's a curious coincidence if we think of it as such. The different layers of the investigation point in different directions, yet all agree that the people involved appear earnest. The deeper one looks into the case, the clearer it becomes that something did occur, something that still resists a complete explanation. Thank you for your support and for cheering us on. It is truly appreciated. If you're feeling generous, drop us a like and remember to subscribe in order to not miss all the good things we have coming up. Stay safe and stay curious. We'll see you in the next.